Beit Raquel, the house of Rachel's children. This house was purchased about 12 years ago. Before we purchased the house, we came here and there was nobody at Kever. There was nobody on the bus. Somebody told me they were the only one on the bus. But when I went on the bus, when they wanted to cut it out, I was the fourth person on the bus. So I handed out flyers. And in a week and a half, I had 32 people on the bus. So when the inspector came to cancel the bus, he walked up the stairs and saw 32 people. That's almost a full bus. So he collected all our tickets, and that saved the bus. So sometimes activism makes a difference. When nobody was coming here and nobody was connected, it was the beginning of Oslo, and they wanted to give away Kever or move it. And my shul, Manhattan Beach Jewish Center, decided to adopt a community. That was our meeting. But in the meeting, I went home and nobody did anything. So I took this on just by myself to do this, and I need everybody to support the work I'm doing. So sometimes, at the beginning, when we did the Haknosa Sefer Torah, that was after the writing contest, and then I saw a Haknosa Sefer Torah, and I said, that's the way to connect everyone to Kever, because if you write a letter in the Torah, then it's your Torah, and if the Torah is at Kever, then this is your place. So in 1998, we gave a Sefer Torah. You can see how crowded it was. There were like 3,000 to 4,000 people. Rabbi was there, Adir Zik. 7 years later, we gave another Torah. And my son made Aliyah, that's for Shavu Bani Lugavulam, and joined Givati. And he's holding the white covers we have for the Torah. That's the picture you have on the wall. That's our symbol of the picture. So we started a museum of Jewish Aliyah, and we started a biblical art museum. This is our second display. My teacher, we have classes every Wednesday for 8 years. This is her mother's artwork. I was walking down one of the streets along Jaffa Road, and I saw the big, beautiful picture in the window. Wow, is it gorgeous. But I didn't know how it was going to come out. So we've been doing these classes and programs while the army was still occupying the building, in the walls. Before we had the building in the hall of Kever, Rebbetzin Heller was standing like in the hall, and we had the men on one side and the women on the other side. And the Boston Rabbi, who's going to be speaking here next week, was there when we gave the Torah. So I'm going to go around, if you can take out, it's 20 shekels. And we're introducing Rabbi Mendel Kessin. He's our rabbi from Brooklyn or Borough Park? Brooklyn, yeah, my neighborhood, right? Flatbush, okay. And Eretz Yisrael. Well, this is where our heart and soul is from, and this is who we are, no matter where we are. We were just scattered, but we're not disconnected. Hashem is here, Hashem is there, Hashem is everywhere, okay? And Ruchel Imeinu reaches us everywhere. So I call my foundation Rachel's Children Reclamation Foundation, because people were disconnected, and we want to claim that connection. And in order to reclaim that connection, we have to know what Ruchel stands for, and her midos, and her empathy, and her care about everybody. So that's what my foundation is interested in doing, spreading Derek Eretz, our identity. So the writing contest, the Rachel and my family, where did her name come from? What about this place? All these other ideals. And Rabbi Kessin is going to speak to us on the connection that's Ruchel Imeinu 3,600 years till today, that she's remembered right till today. For the holidays that we're going to have next week, the week after? Purim, right? Okay, so this is Rabbi Kessin. I'm going to come around and collect 20 shekels. I'm going to do it very quietly.
I'd like to begin and say that in many ways it's a great covered honor to speak at Kever. And I hope that the schus of the shir, she's right over here, and be a meilit yosh in that schus. I can't talk now. I'll talk to you later, okay? I'll give you a shir. Yeah, call me later, okay? Bye. I really have a very interesting connection to Rochel Imeinu, and one of them is that her Yotzeit is Yud Aleph Cheshvan. I'm sure we know that, Yud Aleph Cheshvan, and that's my birthday.
I just met a few people who said
What?
birthday. I just was leaving my house in Arzea Be'era, and I said hello to this man. He said, "You're going to Kever today?" I said, "Yes."
Say,
he says, "My connection is, it's my birthday."
Yeah. So it's my birthday, and it's really an honor to speak on Kever Rochel. But I'd like to do something different. And that is to explain who Rochel Imeinu is, really. What's the Indian of Rochel Imeinu? Can we understand the concepts of Rochel Imeinu on a much deeper level? And the answer is, of course. So that's what I'd like to do. And I really want to start off the shir with two questions. One, who is Rochel Imeinu? Why is she so special? I mean, she died very young. I think she died at 36 years old. And of course, she's not buried where Yaakov Avinu is buried, which is in Hebron. She's not buried with Yaakov Avinu. She's of course buried here. And the question is why? What does all this mean? And of course, Yaakov saw, when he first met her, that she would not be buried with him. He saw Baruch HaKodesh, of course, by the Pasuk, when he met her by the stone, the well, and it said he cried because he saw that she would not be buried. And the question, of course, is, there's something happening here that we obviously don't know. There's something going on here that's far more fundamental, much more deep than we really have an idea about. So I want to go into that. Second thing, which is really very interesting, is that you'll notice that of all the Imos, she's the only one we call Rochel Imeinu. We don't refer to Sarah Imeinu, right? Unless somebody wants to be real from. We don't say Rivka Imeinu and Leah Imeinu. We say Rochel Imeinu. The question is why? And really, as part of that, there's only two Yortzites that the Jewish people commemorate. There's only two Yortzites that the Jewish people commemorate en masse, which means tens of thousands of people come. One is Rochel Imeinu on the Yud Aleph Cheshvan, and the other one is Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, Meron, on Lag Boimer. Right? Those are the two major Yortzites that Klal Yisrael commemorates. Of course, everybody has his special Rebbe or whatever, or other person that they go to see on the Yortzeit, but en masse visitation is done by Rochel Imeinu, and it's done by Rav Shimon Bar Yochai. And the question is, why? Which is what I also like to answer. Okay, there is certain information that you need to know before we even get into Rochel Imeinu. Okay? So you're going to have to really think, you need to focus, because it's stuff that is mostly not familiar with. However, it's prerequisite information that you need to know before we even get into this. Okay. First, you need to understand the mechanics of the Bria. Someday there will be more tape recorders than people. However, fortunately, there's more people than tape recorders, so I know we're still doing okay. in a very simple way, and really each of these ideas can be explained and expanded into an entire shir. But just to touch on some of the ideas. What happens when a person does a mitzvah? Or what is the purpose of the Bria? In very simple words, okay, what the Rebbe Shem did, or does, is he creates this entire creation using 10 forces. In Kabbalah it's called spheres, that's what they're called. And fundamentally there are different ways of understanding it, but they're really forces that can create. They are able to bring things into existence. Now, it depends. What's the reality that they create? It all depends on the power of that force. At a high level, when the force is completely open, it can create things which we cannot even begin to comprehend. That's how powerful, that's how enhanced is that reality. However, if those lights or those forces are diminished, then obviously the reality it creates is much inferior. Now, what the Rebbe did is he separated himself, in a figurative sense, himself from his creation, which means that in his creation we cannot view him. This is called Olam Hazeh. Olam Hazeh, or this world, means a place in which God is separated from, cannot be viewed, cannot be even seen, of course, perhaps can be experienced in a very distant way. That's what Olam Hazeh is. And what the Rebbe wants really is very interesting. He wants the Jewish people, and I'm skipping a lot of the history, fundamentally to change the state of Olam Hazeh, this world, into the future world. That's really what he wants. So therefore, what that means is that, ultimately speaking, as a result of the efforts of the Jewish people, through the mitzvahs that they do, through the tshuva, and also their suffering, they will change this world into the future world. And what that means is that Olam Haba, the future world, isn't a place, it's a state. It's a state of existence. If we can imagine what that is. In other words, if you ask the person, where is Olam Haba, the future world? And the answer is, it's here. Nowhere else, except it's been transformed into a physical universe, into a physical dimension. What the job of the Jew really, when he does the mitzvahs and he does tshuva and so on, is that he brings down this ore, this force, in far greater quantity, or perhaps quality, and he begins to purify the physical world. If he does it enough, if enough Jews engage, for whatever time period it requires, the Jewish people succeed in changing this world into a messianic world, which is the beginning of a process that leads ultimately to the future world. So that's what the Jew does, in a realistic sense. Of course he does mitzvahs and tshuva and so on, when he sins, but what he really does is he changes reality. That's what he does. The Jew repairs reality. Doctors repair people, plumbers repair pipes, electricians repair wires, and the Jew repairs existence. That's the incredible difference. And therefore we are the greatest repair people, they don't say men anymore, repair people the world has ever seen. And that's what the Jew does. And he does that through his mitzvahs. He brings down this ore. And the Hebrew term for that is, when he transformed Olam Hazeh, this world, into a future world, it's called zikuch, to purify. That's what he does. That's the essential labor and effort of all the Jewish people for the thousands of years. Now the question is, well, what happens if we sin? What happens to that force? What happens to that light if we sin? Well, we would think, okay, if the Jewish people sin, if a person sins, then what he does is he denies the entry of that light into the physical world, so to speak. In other words, he denies the ability of that light to purify the physical world. It just stays up there. That's what we would think. But the truth is, that's not really what happens. What the Rebbe did is something very different. What he does is the following. What he does is that energy that we would have tapped into to repair this world doesn't come to us because he sinned. Instead, it goes to the other side. That side is called a Sitra Achra. It's another side. It is dominated by the Satan and that entire realm, if you want to use that word, of existence, which promotes evil and tries to get people to sin. So therefore, the Satan has access to that force. So it's like a seesaw. If the Jew is high and he's bringing it down here, then the Satan is here, Because what's interesting is that there's only enough of that energy, or sparks, that's what it's called, to satisfy one side. If the Jew does mitzvahs and he brings the sparks, the energy, the spheres here, then the Satan starves. If all the Jews do all of this stuff, ultimately the Satan dies. Literally, he dies. Because he needs this energy to survive. In fact, everything needs this energy, this incredible kedusha, to survive. So it's either we get it or he gets it. That's the trade-off. It's a seesaw. Actually what really pits the Jew is the concept of combat. The Jew is in combat with the Satan. Who is going to access that light, that energy? That's really the relationship between us and the Satan. It is really the fundamental mechanism or mechanics of the entire Bria. Is to bring down this ore. So when we do mitzvahs, we get it, and he begins to starve, as we will see. If we sin, then he gets that light, and he's able to use that and empower nations of the world to persecute us and do all kinds of terrible things to us as a result of that. So you have this what's called balancing act. And therefore, this is obviously a bad situation for us. But what it does, so you can ask, well, why do this? Why set up this type of relationship? And the answer is that we need to destroy the Satan. What God has done is empower the Jewish people, not only to transform this world, Olam Hazeh, into Olam Haba, but He has empowered us to destroy evil. Because if we deny the Satan this type of power or energy or light, then what happens? His reign, his realm collapses and he literally dies. He evaporates. He and the entire realm, whatever that is. Everybody got that? It's a fundamental structure that goes on. Very important. And it has enormous amount of repercussions, ramifications, and so on. However, I'm just touching on the structure itself, which is really very important. Okay, so we have that. We now understand that there's a relationship that we have with evil. We can destroy it by doing mitzvahs, and therefore, as a result of that, that entire side evaporates. Very important concept. This concept with the Satan can take from our energy. If we sin, it means that he's yonik. Yonik is a Hebrew word which means that he can nourish from this enormous power, because everything needs that power to survive. Everything. So we're the ones who have it. If we lose it, he gets it. It just doesn't stay up there. Now, obviously, what's the problem here? The problem then is this. There's only a certain amount of energy that comes down from one side. Now, if the Satan gets it, this is no good. What happens is, therefore, is that with this energy, he can empower other nations of the world, as I said, to persecute the Jews, to do all kinds of things, which itself is a whole shir in itself. The whole concept of history is nothing more than the balance between those energies between the Satan and the Jewish people. As we will see, Purim is a classic interchange of that energy, as we will see. In any case, the major problem is this. What happens to all the stuff that he has? How do we take it back? Because we need to take it back. We need to take all that power that he has from our sins, take it back into our side, and then purify the world. So Jews do two things. We bring down the energy, but if we sin, he gets it. The question then is, how do we take it back? Because we need to take it back. The way a person takes it back, or a Jewish person, is there are several ways that he does. One of them is tshuva. What tshuva does, when you repent on a sin that you did, you take back the energy that you let him have as a result of your sin. That's the power of tshuva. So what happens is you deny him, or you remove that enormous amount of spiritual energy, kedusha, from the Satan, that he cannot use, because you did tshuva. What happens? Is there another way? And the answer is yes. If a Jew suffers Yisurin, that also takes back the force that the Satan has, because when a person suffers, he basically expiates. He's forgiven. And therefore, the energy of that sin is also taken back to our side, and therefore, obviously, the Kedusha remains with us. So, you have several ways. But another way is if you go into a very difficult situation, tremendous nisayon, and you remain steadfast, righteous, you also deplete the Satan. That also depletes the Satan and takes it back. So these are the ways that the Jews do it, but we need to do it, because there's only a certain amount of energy, and if he takes, it's not available to us unless we take it back. Very important concept. Therefore, originally, the first man, Adam Rishon, his job was to bring down the holiness. Had he not eaten from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, he would have taken it down, and then that world that he knew would have changed and ultimately become Olam Haba. He sinned. And what do we understand from a sin? All of a sudden, an enormous amount of this spiritual energy or force or kedusha is given to the Satan. You see. Therefore, Adam Rishon now has two jobs. His first job was to bring down that force. However, if that's not possible, because he's giving it over, first he's got to take it back to himself, away from the Satan, and then bring down the energy. You know, it's like moving into a new house. If you move into a new house, what do you want to do? You want to decorate the place, right? You want to decorate it. However, what happens if the previous tenants, they left over a lot of junk? So you're not going to decorate first and get rid of the junk. You get rid of the junk first, right? Throw it all out, and then you'll decorate. It's the same thing. The first job, therefore, that we need to do is to empty the pockets, so to speak, of the Satan. We need to take everything back that we've given him. And after that, we can bring down the rest and change this world into a future world. This is the fundamental setup. Very simple to understand. It's mystical, I agree. But it's true. And we will understand Rachel, how she plays an incredible part in this simple scenario. And you'll understand who she is, why she's so great. Okay? Therefore, this is what we do. We need to empty the Satan of these tremendous Kedusha state back to us, and then we bring down the rest. This is the way, what we have to do. Therefore, Klal Yisrael, the Jewish people who took over the job of Adam Rishon, has two jobs. One is to empty the Satan. That's the first job. Okay? That's called Kfiyah Surah. What is Kfiyah Surah? To be koifa, to subdue evil. Because that's what happens. When you take back that energy, then the Satan becomes incredibly weak. And ultimately, he dies. So the first tachlis of the Jewish people is what? Is to subdue evil. How do we do it? Tshuva, Yisurin, and also by withstanding a tremendous nisoyan of the Satan, you weaken him. That's the first job. The second job is the original job of Adam, is to bring down the energy. But because he sinned and gave a lot of it to the Satan, we now have two jobs. That, by the way, is the reason why there's two Mashiachim, two Messiahs. One is Mashiach ben Yosef and Mashiach ben David. Mashiach ben Yosef is involved with taking out from the Satan the side of evil and destroying evil. There's an enormous amount of Kedusha that we have sinned and given him. That's his job. Mashiach ben Yosef and all those people who claim title to that, this is what they're involved in. Okay? That's why you'll always find these people always fighting it out with the Satan. The second job, of course, is once we've got back all that Kedusha, we add to the Kedusha and we change this world. That's Mashiach ben David. You see, so Mashiach ben David's job is what's called Hispashtis Kedusha, is to spread holiness throughout the world. Whereas Mashiach ben Yosef's job is to take away all the holiness back to us. Mashiach ben David's job is now to bring down the rest and to bring Kedusha to the entire world and change it. So you have two Messiahs, because each job entails a different type of personality. This is the problem. And what's interesting about that is that you'll always look at Klal Yisrael, and they're divided this way. There's some people that are zoichet to be in the Beis Medrash all day, right? They have yeshiva, they give a shir all day. They're zoichet to say shirim all day long or whatever. They're merit, right, to deal with Kedusha, to teach or to be involved, whatever in Kiruv and so on. Then there's other people that have to go and work on Wall Street. That's New York, right? They have to go to Wall Street, they have to go to the Diamond District where there's tremendous amount of nisyonis, temptations. So what's their job? Their job is the first job I mentioned, which is to remain and withstand the nisoyan, and they deplete the Satan, you see. So there are people involved in what? In depleting the Satan, and there are people involved in bringing down the Kedusha. So Klal Yisrael is subdivided in those two areas, because those are the two fundamental jobs. And this is where everything is at. Believe it or not, we think that, our lives are busy and so on, which of course it is, but the real job of the Jews is to balance out in the heaven what's going on, as we will see and so on. And it's our actions that does everything. And in the end, when we do our job, whether it be by tshuva or yisur or suffering, or by engaging with the Satan and remaining steadfast, we bring back all the ore, and as a result of that, the Mashiach comes. The Mashiach comes as a result of the work of Klal Yisrael, and he's got to wait. And if Klal Yisrael does the job, Mashiach comes, which they will do, and so on, and the world changes. That's what it's all about. Messianic era is nothing more than the era, it's called the payoff, of all the avoid of the Jews for thousands of years. This is the payoff. Okay? Let's take a look now. So you're going to say, wow, what a system. Is this real? And so on. Can we see this in Chazal? Do we see it in the Chumash? And the answer is, how can we not see it in the Chumash? As you will see. And you begin to realize, at least initially speaking, or superficially, what is really happening. Well, the first man was Adam. His job was what? Not to eat from the tree. And had he done that, then he would have brought down this enormous energy. And great, the world would have changed. By Shabbos, he sinned Friday afternoon. By Shabbos, he would have been Mashiach. The world would have changed. And it would have been an entirely different type of existence. However, he sinned. So what he did by his sinning, and he was an incredibly great person, he gave an enormous amount of this energy over to the Satan. That's what he did. Without going into too much detail, that's what he did. So he gave existence now to the realm of the Satan in a way which is much greater than what the Satan had before. And who was the Satan at the time of Adam? The snake. The snake is the mouthpiece of the Satan. At that point in time, he was external to the body of man. But when Adam sinned, he now became internal to his mind, and it's much harder to get him out. However, that was Adam. So the Moshe said, okay, here's what has to happen. Okay? I need two people always. One is going to do the job of getting the stuff back, and the second one will do the job of what? After you bring it back, bring down the rest. Because Adam failed, and therefore the job was taken away from him. But what Adam did is he actually increased the amount of work by now adding a dimension where you need to take it out of the Satan's hands. That never happened before. So along comes his kids, Cain and Hevel. Who are Cain and Hevel really? Why both? Well, these are the two people that took over the two jobs. Cain is a person where it actually says, "La pesach chatas revetz," sin is at your door. What is the Moshe saying? He said, listen, your job is to do what? Is over Adoma, to work the earth, which means to do what? To remove the evil from the earth, which is a place actually where the Satan manifests himself. Your job is to interact with that and take it out of the hands of the Satan. So he's an Oved Adoma, and he says, the Moshe says to Cain, La pesach chatas revetz, sin is at your door, which means that that's the contest. Either you win and you take it out, or you lose and he gets even your stuff. Whereas Hevel's job is different. Hevel's job is a shepherd, is to bring the flock back to the corral, which is the Kedusha. See, even their job titles mirror what really they were supposed to do. But that's why they're two people. Of course, Cain sinned, he killed Hevel, so that made it even much worse, what he did. And the time you get to Noach, it was terrible. In fact, the very great commentator, Makubal Ramchal, Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, says that if you want to know how much stuff the Satan had, the Kedusha he had, compared to how much was in the side of holiness, if you look at the ark, the relationship in spatial terms between the ark and the entire flood of the planet was like 99.9999999, right? Was in his hands, was in the Satan's hands. Because all the 10 generations of the flood, all of that up to the flood, they all sinned terribly. In fact, by Enosh, God destroyed 1/3 of the world, the Medrash says. He didn't wait till Noach. By Noach, he destroyed the entire world. But by Enosh, he destroyed 1/3 of the world. Because mankind was doing evil again and again, and we know what the story is. When mankind, it's not just the Jews, when mankind does it before Avram Avinu, we give all the stuff to the Satan. So by the time you got to Noach, which is mind-boggling, you see, all this stuff was in the hands of evil. That's why the Moshe destroyed the world. Because in a world that's 99.999% of evil, there's no Bechira left. There's no free will left. What are the odds that you're going to be Boichel Tov choose good, right? When you live in an environment where everybody's sinning grievously, not very much. So therefore the Baruch Shem said, it's over with. I need to destroy the world. I need to start over again. What does that mean? Why Noach? Because what the Baruch Shem had is very interesting. What he wanted is that 10 generations would go by, and in these 10 generations, each generation would deplete the Satan of the 10 forces, which he now has enormous amount of, and bring it back to the side of Kedusha. And then what would happen is the Messianic light would come down. Because when the Mashiach comes, guess what? He reveals total reality. The Messianic light is a revelation of total reality, and that's what the Baruch Shem wanted. 10 generations go by, each generation repairs one aspect of these forces, right? And he takes it out of the hands of the Satan, puts it back in the hands of Kedusha, and by the 10 generations, it's all fixed. Right? That's what the Baruch Shem wanted. Instead, what did the world do? They didn't do that. They sinned. So they gave all these forces, they enormously increased the amount of force or Kedusha in the hands of the Satan. So therefore the Baruch Shem decided to destroy the world and start all over again. Now the interesting thing about it is, why water? Because water is the physical analog of Torah. Many times the rabbis bring it down. Therefore, what really should have happened at the time of Noach, in the 600th year of the life of Noach, that should have been the release of this incredible messianic light that would have happened had everybody brought the energy back. You see. Therefore, that Mayim, which came from the heavens and came from the earth, is the Or Mashiach that was reversed into a death trap called water. And therefore, the Or Mashiach, like it says, in the time of the Mashiach, right, the earth will be filled with the glory of God, Kimayim, right? Mole Kolor Deo. That's a marble. But it's not a marble of water, it's a marble of unbelievable Kedusha and Hasaga, comprehension of God and so on. So instead of that being a light, the Or Mashiach, it was water. So water is a physical analog of the Or Mashiach, which came out on that time. Now we understand the marble, we understand why God wanted to destroy, because again, it's the relationship between the Satan, right, and us. Who's got the energy? Who has the Kedusha? Now, here comes the interesting part. When was that energy, when was the Or Mashiach supposed to come down? Well, we know it came down on the 18th day of Cheshvan. It says in the second month, right? In the second month, right? In the 18th day, the waters begin to come out. But we know that the waters is what? Is the physical analog of the messianic light that should have come down. Right? So on the 18th day, which is interesting. But really it should not have come down on the 18th day. It should have come down 7 days earlier. Because the Baruch Shem didn't do it for 7 days because Mesushelach, the oldest man who ever lived, died. And the Baruch Shem did not want to bring that water and to disrupt his Levaya and to disrupt his Shiva. Right? So what he did, the Baruch Shem did, is he waited 7 days. So the 18th day came, noon, and then it went to the 19th day, and that was the first day of the Mabul. But really, what was the first day that the Mabul should have began, or in its pristine form as the Or Mashiach? What day is 7 days before the 18th? We can all subtract, and it comes out to 11. Wow, Yud Aleph Cheshvan. Isn't that interesting? So, yes, Yud Aleph Cheshvan. Yud Aleph Cheshvan is the day of the Or Mashiach. That's what it really is. And we see that from history, you see. So that's when the Or should have come down. But like I say, it didn't, because the Baruch Shem didn't want to interfere with the Levaya and the Shiva of Mesushelach. So he waited. Imagine how great a tzaddik Mesushelach is. In a certain sense, it was good for the world, because the world was not drowned for another 7 days. But really, it should have come down Yud Aleph Cheshvan. So Yud Aleph Cheshvan isn't a day; it's a day of the messianic light, which is extremely powerful. Okay, now we begin to get a handle on something going on here. For Yud Aleph Cheshvan, such a powerful day, well, we can begin to see certain things. However, we're not there yet. Let's continue. So we begin to see a story folding. So the Baruch Shem destroys the world, Another 10 generations goes by, right? Another 10 generations goes by between the Noach Mabel and the Dor HaFloga, the generation of dispersion where he confounded the languages. But that was really a Mabel. It should have been. But God swore that he would not destroy the world. So what he did is he destroyed the Achdus of the people at that time. So he spread them all over the world. And the second thing he introduced, something which really splits everything, is the concept of languages. All of a sudden there were different languages in the world, so obviously nobody understands anybody else, as the Medrash points out and so on. So therefore, because the Rosh said, as long as they're united, they're going to gang up together, follow one guy and destroy. So I have to stop this. So what he did is, he removed the Achdus by splitting the entire world, certainly through languages. Fine, okay. But again, the same concept of 10 generations. Because the Baruch Hashem said, okay, let's wait for Noach and the next 10 to do the tikkun. The tikkun, the rectification of creation, means to bring down, remember there are two aspects to rectification now. One is to take away all the stuff that the Satan has, back into outside. And the second thing is to bring it down, the rest, and together change the entire world, and that's the Messianic era. Okay? But obviously it didn't happen. It wasn't happening. So what did the Baruch Hashem do? You're down whoever's got this tape recorder is down to the end. In any case, so what did the Baruch Hashem do? So the Baruch Hashem realized, and I'm not going to go into it because it's a whole thing in itself, he realized that this is not going to work. The world will not do the tikkun. There's Nimrod, and he starts his business. It's not going to work. So the Baruch Hashem turned away from the world, and he looked at Avram Avinu, and he said, you're the only guy doing it. Therefore, I'm going to make a covenant with you and your descendants only. You do the tikkun and your descendants. And that's the origin of the Jewish people. The Jewish people took over what 2,000 years of history, because Avram Avinu was 52 years old when the world turned 2,000. So the Baruch Hashem turned away from the world, and he looked at Avram Avinu and says, okay, you're the guy who can do the tikkun, and you and your descendants. So he made a bris ben Absaram, the covenant, that you are the only one, and that was it. Mankind lost the ability. Avram has it, and we have it as a result. And the only way anybody in mankind can get it back is he must become Jewish. In any case, so this is a very short history, but you begin to see something fashioning up here. So, what's the job? The job is tikkun, and there are two jobs to tikkun, right? Take it back and bring it down. That's right. Deal with the evil, destroy the evil, and then bring down the kedusha. That's always the two jobs. So, I'm skipping over Avram and Yitzchak. I get to Yaakov and Esav. You know, Yaakov and Esav is a very difficult story to understand. You know, if I ask you, how many of us were there? You're all going to answer 3. And now I ask you how many imors were there, mothers were there, matriarchs, you're all going to answer 4. Right? Did you ever wonder why there's a disparity here between 3 of us and 4 imors? I'm sure you wondered it, right? You know what the answer is? There are really 4 of us. There's Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and Esav. Esav is the 4th of, exactly. But the problem is that Esav sinned, so he was gone as an of. Who is Esav? Well, remember what I said, that there are 2 jobs? So therefore, Yaakov had the job of Ohel, Yoshev Eholim, to sit and learn Torah. That's the job of bringing Kedusha. And Esav had the job of Ish Sodeh, to go into the field to withstand the Nisyonis, the temptations of the Satan, and then he could take back the Kedusha. Isn't that amazing? That's who they really were. So the job of Esav is in the same job as Mashiach ben Yosef, so to speak, and the job of Yaakov in the job of Mashiach ben David. Olam is the Spashtis Kedusha. You see, and that's why they were twins, because they were both as great as each other. Yes, Esav was greater than Yaakov Avinu. The Paneach, who's a Rishon, says that Esav was twice as great as Yaakov Avinu. Imagine what that man's koyach was. I don't know, it's a whole shir, but anyway, and so on. And obviously he fell, because he couldn't handle it. Listen, you know, obviously the test he had was equal to his measure of who he was, and he fell, and that's it. So Esav is out. Okay? But now we get to, wait a minute, it's interesting. So Yaakov's got a shidduch. What's his shidduch? Rachel. Right? And Esav has a shidduch, Leah. Leah was supposed to go to who? Esav. That's the zug of Esav. We know that, because that's why Leah cried her heart out and her eyes, right? Because she knew she was going to marry Esav. Why? Because she was the zug of Esav in that inyan. You see. what happened? Well, Yaakov, Esau failed, and therefore Leah was devastated because she said, "Gewaltig Stücken, I'm going to have to get married to a guy that's a Russia? No way," right? So what happens? But remember the story, because Klal Yisrael needs 2 jobs, right? So if Esau fails and there's only Yaakov Avinu, so what happens to the second job? Who's going to confront the evil and take it back? And the answer is Yaakov. Yaakov doubled up. He took over the job of Esau. That's what happened. And once he took over the job of Esau, he had to go to the house of Lavan to withstand evil. You see how the story what's really going on? That's why Yaakov went to the house of Lavan after he took over. He got the brachas, which is the job of Esau, and therefore he had to now do the job of Esau. How can one man do 2 jobs? And the answer, he really can't. Therefore he had to elevate. Therefore God elevated one of the Shvatim to be a half of. Who is that? Yosef. Now, let's go back to Rachel. Rachel, what's her job now? Her job is really evil, to deal with the concept of evil. That's her job. She is the Inyan of Ben Yosef, the Mashiach Ben Yosef. That's who she is. She's a female Ben Yosef in that sense. And her job is to deal with the evil, to remain steadfast in righteousness, and to destroy the evil. Yes, very powerful woman, as you will see. Okay? And she was phenomenal at that job. Not only that, but the Rosh Hashanah saw, he knew before, what Rachel did, and that's one of the, in certain ways, it's a problem for Rachel. Rachel was an unbelievable good neshama, as they say in Yiddish. It was an incredible Bal Chesed. Why? Imagine she's marrying Yaakov Avinu. Yes? Okay, Leah, I feel sorry for my sister, but okay, too bad. Right? What am I supposed to do? What does Rachel do? She goes over to Leah and gives Leah the password that Yaakov gave her, because Yaakov Avinu knew that Lavan is trying to do a switch job. He's going to try to give who? He's going to try to give Leah to Yaakov so he can get another 7 years out of him. I'm repeating the story, right? So he figured, well, he's going to switch Leah, right? So Yaakov told Rachel, let me give you a password. And I'll know under the chuppah or whatever when we go home that it's really you, and so on. Fine, okay. So Yaakov gives Rachel a password, and Rachel gives a password to Leah. So what she did is she took Leah, her sister, who could not marry Esau, would have been terrible, and she gave him to Yaakov Avinu. It's unbelievable. Why is it unbelievable? Because what she did is unheard of. Because she knew that she would be a matriarch. That means, imagine, what would a guy do if he found out that his wife was a co-conspirator with the woman that he just married, which wasn't supposed to be the woman he married? And he found out that his wife was the one who enabled this. What would he do? He dropped the shidduch. He said, "You crazy? How can I trust you?" He would destroy the trust relationship. She would, wouldn't she? No man is going to marry that woman. Right? Of course not. Yet Rachel didn't care. Rachel said, "I realize that he can reject me. And if he rejects me, I'm not a matriarch." Right? That means I'm taking an unbelievable risk or gamble that I will not be an Ein B'Yisrael if this gets found out, which of course it was, because the next morning it obviously was found out that it was Leah and not Rachel. But Rachel was a murdig Mesiras Nefesh. This is called Lifnim Meshus Adin. So the Rosh Hashanah looks at her and says, listen, that type of quality cannot go unrecognized. For somebody to do battle with the Satan, requires an unbelievable. You know what it is to do battle with the Satan? To have nisyonis and fight to remain righteous and so on. All kinds of other problems. I don't know the problems when the Satan is after you and you're trying to battle the Satan, right? So Rachel knew that, but Rachel had this unbelievable quality of what's called Mesiras Nefesh. What Mesiras Nefesh? So Rosh Hashanah said, I need somebody with that quality. Why? Because you're going to have to suffer for the sins of the Jewish people. I need somebody to take on some of the suffering of the Jewish people. And only somebody who has that quality of Lefnim Meshus Adin, beyond the measure of justice, who has that Mesiras Nefesh, who has that feeling for a Jew, that's the person I need. So what happened is that Leah, among other reasons, and there are, she took over the quality of Esau, not Yaakov, which means to fight evil. But she was able to do it because of a tremendous Mesiras Nefesh. So this is what happens. Therefore, who now has the job of fighting with the Sultan? Esav originally had it. It now goes to Rachel, because she's the consort of Yaakov that can do it, not Leah. So she can do it. So therefore, her children took it over, especially Yosef. Yosef took over half the job of Esav. And therefore, what happens when somebody takes over the job where he has to fight the Sultan? He has to go into a satanic territory, as they call it, a place of unbelievable evil, right? And remain righteous. Well, where did Yosef wind up? Egypt. And Yaakov knew that's going to happen, because it says, Yaakov Shomas Adova. He knew this was going to happen, that Yosef is going to go to Egypt, because somebody who takes over the job has to go into the field, Ishsadeh. Yosef went into Egypt, which is a tremendous place of evil, in order to bankrupt Egypt of all those forces. Because the rule is that there's always one nation of the world that the Sultan uses as his major agent. Those days it was Egypt. Egypt was the Bechor of the Sultan, was the firstborn, so to speak, of the Sultan. So therefore, Yosef had to go into Egypt, withdraw the energy, and collapse Egypt. Do you ever wonder why there was a famine in Egypt? And the answer is there are two ways to get out of prison. One way is to hire a great lawyer. However, there's a cheaper way. What you do is you draw out the energy of evil from that place, and it collapses. That's what you do. Because all of these things are propped up by the Sultan and the energy he has, which he took from the sins of the Jews, and he's able to give success to nations of the world. So Yosef withstood tremendous amount of nisyonis in Egypt. One of the greatest was the inyan of Potiphar's wife, but he withstood it. What happened? So Yosef was able to withdraw enormous amount of energy, spiritual force, kedusha, that the Sultan has, and therefore empowers Egypt. Therefore, if Yosef withdrew it, what happens to Egypt? What happens to the Sultan? The Sultan starves. No kedusha. If the Sultan starves, who else starves? Egypt starves. And that's why there was a famine. Yosef created a famine, which made Paro dream that there was going to be a famine, which ultimately took Yosef out of prison to interpret it, right? Look at the chain of events, right? In other words, he got himself out of prison. Again, because Yosef interacted with Egypt and he remained a tzaddik, therefore he was able to withdraw the enormous kedusha in the hands of the Sultan, and the main agent of the Sultan is Egypt in those days. So therefore the Sultan is starving. He doesn't have the energy enough. So if he starves, all his guys, all his cohorts, all his agents also starved. So therefore, the concept of the famine of Egypt was a result of the avodah of Yosef HaTzadik. Therefore, Paro has a dream that there's going to be a famine. And of course, he needs an interpreter. So who's the interpreter? Yosef. But Yosef is the one who caused Paro to have the dream in the first place. You see the way it worked? It's an incredible, ruchnistic way of dealing with reality or politics. Anyway, because that's the koich of Yosef. Yosef is able to withdraw, you see, because he's the inyan of Bnei Rachel, Binyamin and Yosef. Isn't that interesting? You see, what the story is incredible. You see, what I'm showing you is the real theme of what's going on. And the theme is far longer than I'm talking here. I'm going for hours and hours, going through all the sections of the Torah, showing you how all these manifest. Great. Where's the next place we find? So remember, the concept of somebody who deals with the Sultan, to withdraw the energy, needs to have Mesiras Nefesh. Right? That's very important. Not only that, he needs to have tremendous spiritual strength to fight this. And he needs to be able to be willing to suffer for the Jewish people, which means to be separate from the Jewish people. And the next person, so Yosef was separated from his family for so many years. Right? Lavan was separated from his father also for so many years. Who's the next figure we find incredibly separated? Moshe Rabbeinu. Who is Moshe Rabbeinu? Moshe Rabbeinu is the Mashiach ben Yosef. That's who he really is. Because that's the job of the Mashiach ben Yosef. To take the Jews out of Egypt, to give them the Torah, to bring them to Eretz Yisrael, and to reveal the Messianic light, which are the first tablets. He's Mashiach ben Yosef. Where was Moshe Rabbeinu for 56 years? Well, at 26 years old, he ran away from Egypt, didn't he? Why? Because they were going to kill him, because he killed the Egyptian. Right? First of all, Moshe Rabbeinu was born in the house of Pharaoh. I mean, there's no greater place of evil than the house of Pharaoh. And he's got to withstand all the temptations. Imagine living. Imagine if the Sultan was your roommate. What'd you do? You'd go crazy. Because every minute, every second of the day he's doing some evil. And you got to sit there and look at this guy and withstand evil. Moshe Rabbeinu is in the house of Pharaoh. He kills an Egyptian and he has to flee for 56 years. Because the next time we hear of Moshe Rabbeinu is, how old is he? He's 80 years old. And he ran away when he's 26. By my count, that's 54 years. You imagine what it means to be out of the Jewish people. Look, all the Jews were in Mitzrayim. There were no Jews outside. That means Moshe Rabbeinu for 54 years never had a minyan. He never had a minyan, he never said a Kaddish, he never had a shir, nothing. For 54 years. Why? Because that's the concept of Yosef. You need to be able to stand apart and suffer and be in the domain of evil and withstand righteousness. That's Moshe. That's why he was gone for 56. Before we hear of him again, he's gone for 56 years. Because he is the Mashiach ben Yosef. Who's the next one? Well, the next one is Bnei Binyamin, Shaul HaMelech. Do you ever wonder why Shaul was a king? He's not from Yehuda. Why is he king of Israel? Why is Saul, the king of Israel? And the answer is because he's Bnei Rochel. He's Binyamin. He's a Benjaminite. Right? That's what he is. And those are the guys that can do it. So he's appointed king of Israel because he is in the footsteps of Mashiach ben Yosef and he could be king. That's why he could be king. But he failed. Because what was the job of Shaul HaMelech? Ultimately is to destroy Amalek. Because that was the nation extant at that period. Alright? So he captures Amalek, he kills them all, he captures Agag, the king of Amalek, and he lets him live one more day, in which that day he was able to have kids, whatever. Right? So he failed. So Shmuel HaNavi comes over, excuse me. That was the height. This was what you had to do. And that would have been the end of Amalek. Which is incredible. And that's your job, Shaul, because you're Bnei Rochel. Failed. So therefore Shmuel HaNavi told him, it's over with. You've lost your kingdom. Why? It's not only because he failed to do his job, which is bad enough, but that was his main job, is to destroy Amalek. And he failed. See? So that's Shaul HaMelech. All of this is from Rochel Imeinu, you see. When's the next time we find this? The classic medrash of Rochel Imeinu, Babylon, where Rochel Imeinu dies, Yud Aleph Cheshvan, on that day, and she's buried in Beis Lechem. And she's not buried with who? With Yaakov Avinu, in Kever. Why? Because the capacity of somebody who's in the union of Yosef to fight the Satan needs to be willing to be separate, to fight what's called in Kabbalah the Klippa. And he needs to be separate, and there's ways that the fact that she's not buried with Klal Yisrael is a tremendous atonement for the Jewish people. Because her neshama suffers, because she's disconnected from a certain light, and that suffering enables us to survive. That's how we survive, you see. Therefore, but that special quality is somebody who's in the idea of Yosef, and also has the tremendous quality of Mesiras Nefesh. And the next time we find it is the famous time in Babylon, where Nebuchadnezzar destroyed the Beis HaMikdash. He's now exiling all the Jews to Babylon, right? And all of a sudden they pass by her Kever. In fact, she died at that Kever, which happened on that day, because the Bosham knew that they would pass on their way to Babylon, because Nebuchadnezzar used to exile all the people that he captured. So they shouldn't plot again, right? And they're all going to Babylon, which is east of here, northeast of here, right? Babylon, by the way, is Iraq. They're all on the way to Iraq, so to speak, right? And they pass by Rochel's Kever. And they pray to Rochel Imeinu. It says, we're stuck. We're going into Golos for the first time. For the first time in Jewish history after Egypt, the Jews are going to Golos. You need to pray for us. What happened? So there's an incredible medrash. And then we see the power of Rochel, where the medrash says that everybody who's a who's who in Judaism appeared before the Beis Din and said, please, you want to do an exile, fine, just 70 years, and that's it. Right? They're all saying this. Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Moshe, Aaron, Shmuel, everybody's a who's who is praying in front of the heavenly tribunal to try to mitigate, to soften the exile decree against the Jews. Nobody succeeds. Along comes Rochel. I don't know if she comes along, but she stands in front of the bar. Now, I'm like, what is she going to say? So she says something, and I'll show you why she won. She says something which is incredible. She said, look, you're right, God. There's no way we could save these Jewish people, because clearly the sins of the Jews merit their exile. And that exile was supposed to be until the end of time. You should know. That's what it was supposed to be. So Rachel says, but I want to tell you something, Rabbi Shalom. Let me offer my plea. Let me offer a plea. So here's what she says. Remember, I risked not being a mother in Israel because I gave the passwords to Leah. That means I jeopardized not only jeopardized my husband, because he would have walked out, I jeopardized being a matriarch in Klal Yisrael. I mean, that's priceless. There's no value on that. All because I did a chesed to my sister. This is called lifnim mishur zadin. I didn't have to. There's no halacha that says I got to give up my man for another woman. Rishtei tazazach, as they say. It doesn't say anywhere. Yet I did this lifnim mishur zadin. In other words, I was not jealous of my sister, and I bowed to her salvation. The fact that she would have menucha, she would also be part of Klal Yisrael. It's unbelievable. So therefore, I did lifnim mishur zadin. So Rachel said to Moshe, so don't be jealous about the fact Kaviochel, that Jews worship idols. Right? Put away the jealousy. I wasn't jealous, and I went lifnim mishur zadin. You two do the same thing. Go lifnim mishur zadin and do the decree for only 70 years, even though they don't deserve it. She won, because everybody else claimed what? Based on din. Please, they don't deserve this, and so on and so forth. She said, forget about the din. You win. My claim is lifnim mishur zadin, beyond the measure of justice. Do what I did, she said, in my merit, save the Jews. That's what she did. And the decree was lifted, 70 years, whatever, which is astounding. So there you are, but what's part of the payoff? The part of the payoff is who Rachel is. That she's a woman that stands apart from the Jewish people. She stands here in a fortress, which is beyond belief, right? She's in a fortress in order to do what? In order to somehow minimize the suffering and the redemption of and the exile of the Jews. I remember a very moving thing. You heard of Chaim Shmulevitz. He used to be the Rosh Yeshiva of the Mir Yeshiva. A very famous person, tremendous person. So he used to go to certain places. It's interesting. He went to Avshalom. I went to Avshalom, the one who rebelled against David HaMelech. Why? Because he said, listen, David HaMelech forgave his son, forgive Jewish people. He looked for ways that he could argue. So he used to come to Rochel Imeinu's Kever, and you know what he would say? It said in the Torah, in Yirmiyahu, Lamed Aleph, he says, Mini koilech mibechi, remove don't cry. Stop your crying, Stop the crying. And withhold the tears of your eyes, because your children will be redeemed. So Rabbi Chaim Shmulevitz used to say, name. He used to say, vain mama. Vain, which means cry, adraba. The more you cry, the greater will be the salvation of the Jews. Very interesting the way he used the taina and so on. He saw it in a whole different light and so on. But in any case, this is the power. So she actually got the Jews out. So she really is the mother of redemption in that sense. Why? Because her job is to handle the Satan. And her kid's job is to handle the Satan. It's Yosef and it's Binyamin. That's the job. Okay, where's the next time? And therefore she won. Unbelievable that she beat out all the tzaddikim before her, because her taina was lifnim mishur zadin. And where do we find her again? Purim. Who is Mordechai HaYehudi? What tribe does he come from? Binyamin. Incredible. Who is Mordechai fighting? Haman. Who's a Haman? He's an Amaleki. But that's exactly what people do. Bnei Rachel fight. They take on the evil. They take on the evil. They take on Haman. They take on Amalek. That's Mordechai. Mordechai is Mashiach ben Yosef almost. That's who he is. He's one of the children of Rachel, right? He's Binyamin, right? He's one of the kids, and therefore he has the power to destroy Haman, and that's exactly what he did. And that's Purim. Purim is nothing more than another story of Rachel and her kids doing the job. And if you want to know, did he succeed? Let me tell you something interesting, which most people do not realize. Remember what I said, in heaven it's all about the balance between the Kedusha. How much Kedusha is in the hands of the Satan, and how much Kedusha is in the hands of the Jews. It's all about the balance. Now the rule is, which is very interesting, is that exactly the amount of balance up there must be reflected here. In other words, if the Kedusha, because it's very interesting, when Yosef came to Paroi, right, and he said to Paroi, and he gave him an eitzah, what to do and so on and so forth, this doesn't make sense. Imagine if a president calls somebody to give him advice, and the guy gives him advice, and he says to, I like your advice, I'm going to make a grand vizier. You don't do that. You pay him his check, you pay him his consultation fee, and you move on. Why would Paroi make Yosef the grand vizier? It's the second most powerful man in the kingdom. You know why? He had no choice. Because remember, Yosef had removed an enormous amount of Kedusha from the Satan. So the Satan was powerless. But in heaven, that's what happens. All the stuff is on the side, almost all of it is on the side of Kedusha, Klal Yisrael. So therefore, Paroi is now lowered. His ability to rule is lowered. So therefore, Paroi must assign Yosef to be second to the king, because the amount of Kedusha in heaven was so great that Paroi had no choice, had no free will. You see, that's why he would make a consultant the Grand Vizier. Because the appointment of Yosef to be Grand Vizier is a reflection of how much Kedusha Yosef had removed from Egypt. Got that? Move on to Purim. Where's the classic turnaround? V'nahapoichu. You know where it starts? Exactly, Balayla Hu. So what happens? Right? So Haman comes in with this incredible idea, right? Royal horse, royal garments, and the crown. I mean, forget about his megalomania. But okay, right? And he comes in, and he tells this to Achashverosh. So Achashverosh, of course, means it for Mordechai. So he's unwittingly telling Achashverosh how to reward Mordechai. What a fool. But he doesn't know. What happens? So what happens? Mordechai is riding on the horse with the levush of the melech, with the crown of the king, right? And he's being led by the second most powerful man in the kingdom. What does that sound like? That's exactly what happened. That the Mordechai in the tshuva, Mordechai and Esther in the tshuva of the Jews, was so powerful, it removed all the Kedusha out of the hands of the Satan. So therefore, Achashverosh had no choice. Therefore, Mordechai has to be on the horse, because that's where the Kedusha is, way above the Tumah, right? And Haman has to be leading him, because in heaven, that's exactly what the balance is. You see, the classic switch. And therefore, that's one of the very important idea. That's where you really see, because the balance in heaven is always reflected here. And therefore, Haman leading Mordechai with the royal garments tells you that in Shemayim, the Kedusha is almost in the hands of Klal Yisrael. What a barometer, an indicator. You see, it's the exact same thing as Yosef and so on. So we see the story is incredible. Who Rachel really is, who her kids are, the ongoing attempt always to save the Jews, their willingness to be apart from the Jews. Rachel is here, not by Kever, right? Yosef, where's Yosef? He's buried in the middle of Egypt. Nobody knows where Yosef is, right? He's in Shechem. What's around Shechem now? Yishmael. Okay? Moshe Rabbeinu, nobody knows where he's buried. Right? And so on. All these people, somehow Moshe Rabbeinu has to leave for 56 years. All these people are apart from Klal Yisrael. Because that's what it means, Ish Sodeh. You need to go into the field, got to do your work, even if it means you're not in yeshiva, and so on and so forth. This is what's happening. Therefore, we now understand what is going on. We now understand, we have a glimpse into who Rachel really is, and the power that she has. Therefore, she dies on Yud Aleph Cheshvan, because that's the day of the Or, which she will restore. You see, she dies on the very day that the Or Rishon, the Messianic light, comes back. And that's her power, and that's why she dies on that day. Okay, now, therefore, let's take a look. We understand why everybody celebrates Rochel Imenu, right? Because of what she does. She's the symbol of redemption. What about Rabbi Shimon Yochai? Well, the question really is, what is the Messianic light? And the answer is, it's the Zoya. The Zoya is the surface of the Messianic light. It's the beginning of the Messianic light in surface. That's what the Zoya is. Who wrote the Zoya? Rabbi Shimon Yochai. When did Rabbi Shimon Yochai die? He died on Lag BaOmer. What does that mean? Let me ask something. It says in the Torah that in the 18th day of the second month, right, the Mabul started. Right? That's what it says. But we don't know the second month, what's the beginning of the year? Well, there's an argument in the Gemara, right? Rabbi Yeshua says, Rabbi Eliezer says that the second day, or rather the second month is what? Rabbi Eliezer says that the year begins with Tishrei. Therefore, the 18th day of what? Of Cheshvan is what? Is the 18th day of the second month. Because Cheshvan is the second month after Tishrei. But Rabbi Yeshua says no, that Nisan is the first of the year. Right? Okay. What's the 18th? So what's the second month? It's not Nisan, it's Iyar. What's the 18th day of Iyar? Lag BaOmer, isn't it? Lag BaOmer. That's what it is. Why? So Lag BaOmer, the Yud Ches, again, that's the day that Reb Shimon died, and his major contribution was the Zoya, which is the beginning of the Messianic light. So he dies on the day that Rabbi Yeshua says is the Messianic light. And therefore, Klal Yisrael knows this. In their guts, as it says in the Gemara, even though they're not Nevi'im, even though they're not prophets, but B'nai Nevi'im Haim, they are the sons of prophets. They can actually feel what the emes is. So Klal Yisrael knows that Yud Aleph Shvat 1, we need to get gathered together by Rochel, and Yud Ches Iyar, we need to gather by Reb Shimon, because both were instrumental in what? In saving the Jewish people. In fact, remember it says that the Rebbe said, in order to stop me from destroying the world, I will have a rainbow, right? Because the world has sinned so much, I need a rainbow, so to speak, to remind me, right? It says in the Gemara that no rainbow ever happened in the days of Reb Shimon and his son Rabbi Eliezer. Why? Because they brought down that light which Noach failed to bring, because it was all the tumah and so on, Reb Shimon brought down. Right? So therefore, he was able to prevent a rainbow in his generation. Because you didn't need to have a reminder of no Mabul. There was no Mabul because he was the Masakin for that. Interesting. He's the person that it says that there was no rainbow in his entire generation. Because he didn't need that. Because he brought down the beginning of the Messianic light, which the Noach failed to bring down. And therefore, you don't need a rainbow. And that's why. And we also understand something else. Why does Cheshvan have no Yontif? That's why it's called Mar Cheshvan. All the months of the Jewish year have a holiday. Every one. Except Cheshvan. Cheshvan has none. Why? And it's my belief, because Cheshvan will have the greatest yontif of all. Yud Aleph. Yes. So what Rochel Imenu, her Yortzeit, so to speak, is the greatest of all. Because that's the day of the Orishon, isn't it? So therefore, that time will be so incredible. It will be so glorious that Cheshvan doesn't need any yontif until the end of time. Because in the end, and that's where this tape recorder has just happened, in the end, Rochel Imenu and her kids did it. They fought the Satan and they brought the Geula. And I want to tell you one interesting concept, which is very interesting. Say it. In 1990, before, they went over to Rabin, and they said he wanted to give the Kever back to the Arabs, Rochel Imenu, So many Rabbonim said to him, "How can you do this? Rochel is after the Beis Hamikdash, right? You have Hebron, the third holiest place is Rochel Imenu. And it says Ad Hayom Hazeh in the Torah, this is her burial place until this very day." So they said to Rabin, unfortunately, the man was completely secular. And they said, how do you give Rochel back? Would the Muslims give back, the Mecca? Of course not. Or the stone that they have over there? Of course not. So how do you want to give that back? So in any case, so he said to them something which is incredible. He says, well, if they want her so much, why don't they move her? They should move her Kever. It's an interesting idea from a secular point of view, right? Move her Kever? It's like, what? I mean, it said in the Torah that this is a kever ad hayom hazeh, till this very day. So it's like mind-boggling. Anyway, that's what he said. Fortunately, somehow he changed his mind and so on and so forth. But that concept created an incredible pagam, defect, damage, that probably a Jew can even think that way. Rabin was assassinated November 5th. What was the Hebrew date? Yud Aleph Cheshvan.
On that day, he said Jews should not be able to go to Europe.
Yeah.
They didn't hear because it was just before Shabbos.
Yes. He died on a Shabbos. Yes. Motzoi Shabbos. But in America, even though here it was Yud Beis, but in America it's Yud Aleph because they're 7 hours behind. And as long as it's Yud Aleph on the planet, it's Yud Aleph. And whatever Shefa comes down, still Yud Aleph. Yeah, that's what it is. It waits till the whole planet has another day. You know? So he was assassinated, which is incredible, on Rochel Imena's Yortzeit. You see, in other words, the lesson is, don't start up with Rochel. I mean, don't start up with Rochel Imenu. I mean, you're talking about among the most powerful women that ever lived. And look at her kids. You have Yosef HaTzadik and Binyamin. You have, just the people that came out of Shaul. You have Mordechai. It's just incredible. And Esther, of course, obviously was part of that because he was his uncle and so on. So this is what we see. So therefore, we now begin to understand who Rochel Imenu was, what her power is, and so on. And ultimately speaking, as the Rebbe Hashem said, don't worry, your kids will come back. And it doesn't only mean then by Babylon, it means even today. So we have to be amazed. It's Yosha, of course, that the day has come, that this year will be a day that will come, that the Gula should happen, the Messianic light should, of course, come. And Rochel is going to be sitting up on the dais, in the women's section, but in the dais. Thank you.
That's available. Please help yourself.
That's it?
1 hour, 7 minutes, not minutes.
You want to check
This
yours?
one's mine because I put it second.
Yes, I have my name on it.
Oh, good. Here's yours.
That's
I
it.
closed yours. I closed mine.
All right.
Maybe I'll borrow your tape.
Why would you want to borrow it?
To put my name on
Wow.
mine. Not your tape, the tape on the back. Oh, wait a second. Don't tell me mine wasn't on. Yours was still recorded.
Excuse me. No, somebody has mine. Excuse me, who has this one's mine? Evelyn.
I believe you.
It says it. Look.
I just want to know if mine was recorded.
Oh, I have to shut this off. Did you just shut mine off?
Yeah, I thought that was mine.
Okay.